Story 1. Almost drowned in the Sea of Cortez. I wasn't even swimming. I was just sitting on the sand when I got swept out by a rogue wave. Story 2. My friend pulled up in a stranger's car. She had hitched a ride and was trying to escape her father, who had just hit her in the face with a wooden plank. I got her into the house, and we were hiding with the lights out when he showed up. He pulled into my front lawn in his truck, screaming for her to come out. He started banging on the windows and threatened to break them if she did not come out. My parents were at the bar. First, I called the police, then I called them. The town officer arrived about the same time as my parents, and all the adults stood outside talking for a minute before they came inside. The officer said that my friend had to go with her father because she was a runaway. They told me I was harboring a runaway. She went home with her father, completely failed by the system. After that, we were not allowed to be friends anymore. Her father forbade it. I saw her in a store about 10 years ago, and she still would not acknowledge me when I said hello. A middle-aged woman still afraid of her father. Story 3. Home invasion with a gun drawn in my college apartment. At 3 a.m., a lone man kicked in the front door after announcing himself as security. With the barrel pointed at my head, he said, "Wrong house," and ran out. The neighbor came out half asleep with his bat. Police arrived with dogs but found no trace. Unreal experience. I didn't sleep well for a while and withdrew from a morning class soon after. Story 4. It was around 2 a.m., and I had to take my dog outside to go to the bathroom. As I stood in the yard, I noticed a very large man walking down the sidewalk toward my house. The man looked at me and shouted, "Hey, come over here right now." He sounded angry, and I definitely did not go to him. I locked myself inside the house and watched him from there. He was pacing back and forth on the sidewalk, staring at my house and looking very upset. While I was watching him, 2 cars pulled up to the curb, and several people got out and joined him, also staring angrily at my house. I was very confused because I did not have any enemies, and I was not sure what these people wanted. The man who had shouted at me started walking toward my house again and yelled, "I said come over here, right now." At that moment, the motion-activated light on my porch turned on, and I saw a large, goofy-looking dog sitting there. The dog sprinted away when the light came on, and the man chased after it up the street. The others got back in their cars and followed as well. It turned out the big goofy dog was their family pet that had escaped. It had seen me in the yard with my dog and was running toward me to play. I never saw it until the light came on. The man was yelling at his dog, not me. The people in the cars were family members trying to help catch the dog. A few days later, I saw them walking down the street and introduced myself. Both the dog and the man were very friendly. It was a happy ending to what initially seemed like a creepy situation. Story 5. This happened recently. When I came back from home, I usually eat dinner by myself. That evening, I was lazy and put a frozen pizza in the oven. I had lunch, left the dishes at my desk, and went to sleep because I had to wake up early the next day. I usually do not have to urinate at night, but for some reason, that night I had to go. When I went to the toilet, I saw some light in my kitchen. I went there to check and found out my oven was still running. It had been running for about 7 hours at this point, and you could feel the warmth in the kitchen. Luckily, nothing was inside to catch fire, so I turned it off and had a hard time going back to sleep. Story 6. I was alone in the dark lying in my bed. I was absolutely home alone, and suddenly I felt a huge wave of fear inside me. I heard the bed springs screeching as if someone was crawling towards me. I sat up and froze. It went quiet for a few seconds. Then suddenly something blew hot air on my left ear and neck. I sprinted out of the house. Story 7. Camping alone, something pressed against my tent in the middle of the night. I still have no idea what it was. I was tipsy, reading a dark fiction anthology called Never Whistle at Night by the light of the dimmest lantern you have ever seen. I had to pee badly, but there was no way I was going outside after that. Story 8. I got stuck on a cliff in the mountains while hiking in June and came across unexpected amounts of snow. I lost the correct path and found myself in a position where I could neither go forward nor back, with a 1,000-foot drop right next to me. It was the only time I had to call for help in the mountains. Story 9. I ignored my mother's advice to never walk alone as a woman, especially at night. One night in 2014, after finishing my shift around midnight, I had a craving for donuts. At the time, I was going through a bad breakup, so I decided that since the shop was down the street, it wouldn't be a big deal to walk there. Besides, I could use a pick-me-up. As I reached Winchell's, down the street from my house, and carried my freshly made dozen donuts out the front door, I started heading home. That was a foolish decision. Technically, the whole thing was foolish. But I was 21 years old, so bear with me. As I walked with my box of donuts, a dark figure appeared out of nowhere and started following me home. To put this into perspective, it was Thursday morning around 1 a.m., so literally no one else was out in the city at that hour, or so I thought. About halfway to my home, I noticed he had closed the distance between us to about half of what it was before. He was now roughly 20 feet away. Fumbling for my keys and walking quickly down the middle of the street, I was 5 feet from my garage gate while he was no more than 10 feet behind me. I jabbed my key into the gate, quickly unlocked it, and prayed he wouldn't jump me from behind in the 20 seconds it took to unlock. When I heard the gate click, I rushed inside, slammed the gate, and backed away at least 30 feet. The dark figure stopped facing me across the street, silently watching me with his hands in the pockets of his jumper. Once inside my studio upstairs, I placed the box of donuts on the kitchen counter and crouched by my window to see if the figure was still there. To my relief, he was gone. With no way to identify him to warn the police, I sat on my bed, grabbed a donut, thanked God that nothing had happened to me, and had one clear thought. I will never walk anywhere alone at night ever again. I was saved from a night that could have been much worse. That was my scariest moment, at least the one I'm willing to share. Story 10. Woke up to my front door wide open at 3 a.m. I live alone and always lock it. Nothing was missing, but I did not sleep for the rest of the night. Story 11. I was taking a shower when the bathroom lights suddenly went out, leaving complete darkness. Then I heard what sounded like whispering coming from the drain. I jumped out so fast I nearly broke something. Later, I found out that my upstairs neighbor's television sound was traveling through the pipes. Story 12. Walking home late one night through a quiet neighborhood, I passed a long dark storefront window and saw my reflection moving alongside me under the streetlights. I stopped to check my phone for a second, but in the glass, my reflection kept walking for 2 more steps before it froze. Felt like my brain lagged. I stood there for a full minute, too scared to move, but it never happened again. Story 13. Trying to go to sleep. Looking up at the ceiling when I heard someone snap their fingers right in front of my face. Clear as day. Story 14. When I was 16, I was home alone one weekend, unaware that 2 burglars had taken a ladder from our garage, placed it against my parents' balcony, and entered their bedroom. I was sitting in my bed watching videos with earbuds in. I heard a strange noise and took out one earbud just to listen for a while. I didn't hear more and thought it was probably just house noises, so I put the earbud back in. About 30 seconds later, the door handle to my room was slowly pushed down. As the door opened, I saw the silhouettes of 2 men. Since it was dark in the hallway and the light was on in my room, I couldn't see them clearly. They rushed out the front door as soon as they saw me. Ironically, I had forgotten to lock the front door that particular night. They didn't steal anything, but it left me quite confused. Story 15. Super haunted house. Had several paranormal experiences. An old man died a month before we took the house. It was split into 2 segments. Grandparents lived in the other half and hated it. They always told us they wanted to leave but never explained why. I often asked to sleep with my mom in the living room. I assume it was because I was creeped out as well. Woke up one night to see a figure inspecting our family photos on a cabinet. The best way to explain it is that it looked like a grim reaper that just walked out of a swamp. Mossy and gross. It wasn't sleep paralysis. I tried nudging my mom over and over, pinched myself, hid under the covers, etc. It walked off to inspect other rooms and didn't come back. As for other events, we had frequent kitchen items crash and break in the middle of the night, light bulbs, plates, and so on. During the Great California Earthquake, my mom and I witnessed her bike get thrown in front of the door erratically while we were trying to escape. I also swear that I once saw a floating, glowing head past my bedroom, but I'm somewhat sure that one was just a nightmare. I was about 6 at the time. We moved out of the house because of earthquake damage and talked about it when I was older, around 15. She knew the place was super haunted but couldn't afford to leave. Story 16. I was having a bath at my friend's place. It had not been cleaned for a while and the water was a bit lukewarm, so I was kind of grossed out. I got this feeling of a hair or something tickling me that you almost think is a spider, but never is, and it was a huge spider. Story 17. Paranormal. I heard someone knock on my door. It is a metal security door, hard to miss. I heard my sister's voice say, "Open the door." She has done this in the past, but I was still alarmed because it was around 10 p.m. I went and opened my door. No one was there. I texted her to stop messing around as she likes to scare me. She said she was at home and sent me a video of herself there. I still can't explain that. Normal scary. I had a flat tire on my drive from Los Angeles to Tucson at 3 a.m. on a desolate highway, nearly pitch black. I do not know how to change a tire. I have a bad back. And it was a rental car. A car rolled to a stop behind me with headlights on high. I thought for sure I was going to be harmed. It was a police officer, which made my anxiety worse. He stayed until roadside assistance arrived. It was a very tense, stressful 3 hours. Story 18. I was walking home late one night from the station after work. The walk was about 5 to 10 minutes. As I turned down the street, the last 300 meters to home, I noticed the lights in that lane were off for some reason. All the street lights were off and it was midnight, so it was pitch dark. I, a 25-year-old male, was all alone on that street until I reached my building. I saw an old lady sitting right in the middle of the road. She was homeless and seemed to be mentally handicapped. She saw me and started walking toward me. I ran inside my building and closed the grill of the entrance. She walked closer and said, "It was you, wasn't it? I know you. It was you." All I could muster the courage to say was, "Sorry, I am not carrying any change." And I ran up to my apartment. I do not know what she wanted or if I should have waited, but I have seen enough scary movies to not let curiosity get the better of me. I never saw her again, and I started leaving work earlier. Story 19. My entire family, except my brother, lived in Europe. I had what I thought was a stroke at 20, paralyzed on the right side of my body. Speech was a struggle as I called for help. I was rushed to the hospital and diagnosed with viral meningitis. I evidently got it from a sinus infection I didn't know I had. 45 years later, I am partially deaf in my right ear, and when really tired, my right side doesn't like to cooperate. This was the first of many times life tried to take me out. 20s meningitis. 2. 30s. Motorcycle accident. 3. 40s. Bad landing gear on a plane. 4. 50s. Nearly choked to death on calamari, saved by my friend I was dining with. 5. 60s. COVID-19 3 times despite being vaccinated 7 times, due to careless coworkers who didn't believe in personal space. I figure I will get my 70s free of any life-threatening issues thanks to my 60s experience. Story 20. I saw something about 2 feet long, black, slowly slinking its way into an empty box. I waited 5 minutes before checking, and nothing was in the box. I told my roommate, and he laughed and said, "Oh, that. Don't worry about it. I leave it alone, it leaves me alone. You do the same and you'll be fine." But I never saw it again after that one time. Story 21. I woke up on the couch with sleep paralysis. It was around 5 a.m., and some light was coming through the windows. As clear as day, I could hear a voice behind me to the right talking into my ear. It was a commentator from competitive Super Smash Bros. Talking about the game. Extremely weird, but whatever. Then I looked at the foot of the couch and saw a shadow person. It had a very rounded profile around its head, like it was wearing a big hood. It stood there for a moment, then phased off into another room through an open door. I didn't even know these things existed, but when I looked it up, I naturally called it a shadow person because that is exactly what it looked like. What absolutely gets me years later is how it blocked a light source. At the foot of the couch, I could normally very clearly see the green LED clock on the stove in the kitchen. However, this thing was standing between me and the clock and blocked it. So either something was actually there to block the photons from reaching my eyes, or my brain was really pulling out all the stops in that hallucination. That experience gave me newfound sympathy for people who see paranormal things. Story 22. I was camping in my swag in the middle of nowhere when I was awoken by a dingo sniffing my ear. I had a spare tent pole by my side in the swag, so I started stabbing at the animal with it. It got the hint and left, but for the rest of the night, I could hear either it or its mate stalking the camp. When I got up in the morning, there were footprints everywhere, but only one set came near my swag. Story 23. I got botulism after opening a rusty can of soup. I put a tiny drop on my finger and licked it. My entire body shut down, and I was in and out of consciousness for 3 days. I lost all functions and suffered from severe pain. I should have died. Now I avoid eating from rusted cans. Story 24. When my loved one had a withdrawal seizure 2 days ago, they turned blue in the face. I do not know if they would have survived if I had not been there because there were only the two of us. Story 25. Coming home from college, my global positioning system took me down this pitch-black country road at midnight. The car suddenly died. There was no cell service. I started walking and heard a weird mechanical grinding sound getting closer. I nearly lost control of myself before realizing it was just a farmer on his tractor working late. Story 26. Someone broke into my apartment with a weapon, sexually assaulted me, and strangled me to unconsciousness. Then I developed post-traumatic stress disorder and had no idea I did. 2 years later, my landlord illegally entered my apartment in a different city, which triggered my post-traumatic stress disorder. This caused psychosis with persecutory auditory hallucinations for 2 years straight, with my landlord's voice being one of the 10 that plagued me daily. I was suffering from delusions and paranoia as well, so I became convinced that my landlord had hidden cameras in my apartment, that I was going to be murdered by him, and that I was going to be arrested by the Federal Bureau of Investigation. I spent a lot of money on security for my apartment and covered every screw, smashed the light bulbs, and brought everything important with me everywhere I went, including my laptop to the pharmacy. It was literally insane. I remember sitting under my desk, convinced I was going to be murdered that night, and crying. I would sleep with a knife under my pillow and a hammer beside me. That was definitely the scariest. The post-traumatic stress disorder was much worse than the original trauma. I was alone through it all. Story 27. I heard footsteps around my house. I thought my friends had come back, but no one was there. I am still curious about what that was. Story 28. I climbed down a laundry chute when I was about 5 years old and got stuck. I was in there for what seemed like forever, but it may have just been minutes before I was able to calm down and wiggle free. What an age to discover claustrophobia. Story 29. When I first moved into my new house, everyone told me that my neighborhood used to be very unsafe. It all seemed fine to me. We had limited parking outside our house, but I could park my car at the nearby park as long as I moved it overnight. One night, around 1 a.m., I forgot to move my car, so I went outside quickly to move it. I thought to myself, I'll be quick. I don't need my phone. As I was walking toward my car, a white work van drove down my street. I was not too worried, but they definitely saw me. Then, they turned around, parked right outside my house, and stayed in the van with the engine running. I panicked and tried to get back into my house without being seen. I thought I was going to be kidnapped, so I sprinted once I thought they could not catch me. I got inside safely, but was definitely freaked out. It turned out that the next-door neighbor was starting a carpet cleaning business and had just returned to town with his new work van. He was cleaning the inside of it while it was still running. Story 30. I had moved into my own place the first time living by myself. One night, I was watching television and heard a scraping noise from the kitchen, like something gently being pushed. I went to investigate, but there was nothing out of place or unusual. This happened 3 or 4 times. The kitchen was extremely small. If 2 people stood in there, They would be shoulder to shoulder with barely any room to move. I decided to stand behind the door, leave it ajar, and when I heard the scraping noise, I would flip the light on and open the door simultaneously to catch a glimpse of whatever was making the noise. I waited for a few minutes. When I heard the scraping, I realized it was my trash bin being moved. I took a deep breath and yanked the door open while flipping the light switch. In the 1.5 seconds it took me to see that there was literally nothing there. All the electricity in my house went out. Lights, sockets, everything. The circuit breaker is in the cellar, the entrance to which is in the kitchen. I slammed the door shut, grabbed my phone, grabbed a flashlight from the windowsill, and sprinted upstairs. I barred my bedroom door, looked out of my bedroom window, and saw that the streetlights were on and all my neighbors had power. After a few hours, I drifted off to sleep. In the morning, the electricity was still out. The night before, my logical brain guessed it was a rat making the noise, but since nothing had moved and I hadn't seen anything when I opened the door, my vivid imagination decided it must be supernatural. When I woke up, logic but also paranoia had taken over, and my only guess was that I was not alone in the house. I called the estate agent from whom I rented the house. They said they would send someone out in the afternoon. Over the next few hours, I periodically checked the lights and plug sockets. Nothing, completely dead. The electrician arrived, flipped a light switch, and suddenly, the light came on. Not only that, there was clearly power going to my television and several other appliances. I was freaking out and swore to him it had been out all day, since the previous night. He went down to check the breaker. Everything was fine. Nothing wrong at all. I never experienced anything unusual in that house the entire time I lived there, and I have no logical explanation for what happened. Story 31. Something inside our old bedroom was impersonating my husband. There is a much longer story, but the short version is this. There was only one time my husband was actually in the room, but he was not the one who touched me because he was passed out facing away from me. Every time after that initial experience, I was alone, but also maybe not. Story 32. Severe upper respiratory infection with chronic asthma. I thought I was going to die in my bed, awake and alone. Story 33. Years ago, when I was still in university, my housemate was away at her parents' house. I woke up to use the bathroom and smelled smoke. The downstairs area was on fire. I had to leave by the back door. I got out wearing only a nightgown and carrying my phone. It ruined my final year and I barely passed. The fire was electrical and apparently started at or near the television. Story 34. I was fighting some kind of influenza or a really severe virus. I had a high fever for a few days, and after that, the symptoms worsened. All airways in my skull closed up, and my asthma flared up. Every bit of mucous membrane was swollen, and there was a lot of mucus. I was close to a panic attack, but once I called for help in a similar situation, the emergency doctor dismissed my shortness of breath as imagination, so this time I did not call for help. I tried to sleep as I was extremely exhausted from the illness, and then it happened. Because of gravity and lying down, my airways closed completely while I was asleep. I woke up choking, gasping for air, but nothing came through the mucus. It took a long time and many desperate attempts to get air into my lungs. This was terrifying. I refused to fall asleep for the next 3 days. I only napped for a few minutes while sitting so gravity would not close my airways again, but I still woke up choking a few times. Story 35. A truly severe case of mononucleosis. I had an extremely high fever and hallucinations. The worst joint aches I had experienced until then, later rivaled by a severe COVID-19 infection. I took far too many pain relief pills, several times the maximum dosage, because the pain would not stop and I was no longer making sense. I was not suicidal, just incapable of making decisions or counting anymore. I tried to be in a cold water bath but had to get out because I couldn't keep my head up. I couldn't even walk and tried to crawl to the door, convinced due to my hallucinations and feverish state that I couldn't call an ambulance because it was the middle of the night, which made no sense. I passed out headfirst on the staircase in the apartment complex while trying to crawl down slowly and apparently tumbled down a couple of stairs. I was found by a neighbor who had a long commute and left the house around 5:30 a.m. A couple of hours later. I do not recall this. My first real memory is being in a clinic with ice packs and an intravenous line in my arm. Edited to add, the nurse made a joke about how I got it. Story 36. This is going to sound so stupid, but when I was a little younger, around 12 years old, I was home alone once. Before that, my mom told me not to open the door for anyone. She made it very clear that both she and my dad had keys, and since we were not expecting anyone, there was no reason for me to open the door. I was cooking, actually warming up some junk food in the microwave, because I was not yet allowed to use the stove when home alone. I would stop the microwave every 20 seconds to stir the food and add some cheese. I was basically pretending to cook without actually using the stove. I was very immersed in the process when I heard the doorbell ring. Immediately, my pulse rose and I froze a little. I live in an apartment complex, so someone can ring the doorbell either at the entrance to the building or at the apartment door. I figured it was the first case since other kids often rang random bells to be let in. A few minutes passed and I had finished preparing my microwaved meal and calmed down a bit when I suddenly heard the doorbell again. Then I heard an actual knock on the door and realized someone had been standing in front of my door for about 5 minutes. I was absolutely petrified. My heart was beating loudly, and it became hard to breathe. Slowly and as quietly as possible, I made my way to the front door with my phone in hand, ready to dial the police, and looked through the peephole. There were 2 people standing in front of the door, and neither was my neighbor. They were 2 very non-threatening women, so I didn't call anyone and decided to wait a bit longer. If they didn't leave soon, I would call the police or my mom. I went back to eating to calm down, keeping my phone unlocked and in my hand, ready for whatever happened next. I finished eating and nothing else happened. Then I checked the peephole, and they were gone, but they had slid a pamphlet under my door. I read it and realized that I had just gotten extremely scared by some very persistent Jehovah's Witnesses. Story 37. This happened when I was 12 or 13 years old. My aunt had come into town and stopped by to say hello. While we were visiting, she decided to tell me a scary story about La Llorona. Growing up in a Hispanic household, this story terrified me. Anyways, she told the story, scared me, and left to go meet up with my mom. A few hours later, I woke up in the middle of the night, and every hair on my body was standing up. You know that feeling when every fiber in your being is telling you to leave? I had that feeling. I told myself I was just scared from the story and to ignore it. So I was lying down, still very scared, when I suddenly heard a knock on my bedroom window. Now, me being a stupid kid, thinking I could handle myself, I grabbed my BB gun and opened the curtains to my window. It was my brother. His phone died, and he forgot his house key when he left. One of the worst experiences of my life. Story 38. I have a 3-year-old daughter. This happened a while ago. She can't remember, but I do. For context, my aunt gave us a bunch of old and used toys. One of them was a little interactive table that played songs only when some buttons were pushed. Some buttons were missing. I was at home alone with my 6-month-old daughter, giving her a bottle in her room. Then, out of nowhere, the table started to sing. We both stared at it. At first, it played some songs I recognized, and I assumed a button was stuck. Then it started playing a new song on loop. It said, "Peekaboo, I see you," over and over again for about 5 minutes. I took out my phone to film it, then it suddenly stopped. I put my phone back in my pocket, and the table played the Peekaboo song again, but slowed down, distorted, and louder. "Peekaboo, I see you." My daughter was visibly frightened and started to cry. I checked and tried pushing all the buttons. None were stuck. My husband laughed at me, checked, and we could not make it play the song again. The table ended up in the garbage that very night. We had the table for months before this happened. The house was owned by only one other elderly couple before us. They were still alive and had just moved elsewhere. I still don't understand how it happened. I tried to brush it off as an old toy acting up, but it still creeps me out. Story 39. I was home alone at 13 and I heard someone walking around downstairs. I called my mother and she said she was at work. I grabbed a baseball bat and hid. I yelled that the police were on the way and he ran out. Story 40. I had a man literally walk through my house. I don't live in a dangerous area. I also live in Texas. I don't own a gun, but why would you risk it in this state? My house isn't big, 2,000 square feet. It's a straight shot from my front door to my back door. I was working from home in my office. I usually kept my door closed because my dogs would look out the window and bark at the wind. I was on the phone, so I couldn't have that. My wife works long hours and my kids were at school. I randomly heard my front door open, which was strange because I kept it locked. I figured maybe my wife left it unlocked or the wind blew it open. My dogs didn't run off, so I decided to finish what I was doing and then close it as soon as possible. Then I heard my back door open and close. I was shocked. I walked out of my office, closed and locked the front door, and saw my back door was unlocked. I locked it and then checked my cameras. I have no utilities or anything in my backyard. No power lines or sewage. There was no reason for any kind of worker to be back there. Looking at my cameras, some man walked up to my front door, opened it and walked in. On the inside cameras, he didn't take anything and didn't even look around. My large dogs just stared at him like, "Who is this guy?" Surprisingly, they didn't alert me to the danger. He went straight to the back door and walked out. The backyard cameras showed him walking to the fence and climbing over it. I had never seen this man before. He wasn't my neighbor. I had been living in the house for about 6 months, and there weren't any houses behind me at that time. My wife did leave our door unlocked. It was the strangest and most terrifying thing that ever happened to me. What if he hadn't just walked through? What if my wife and kids were home? We changed our locks and called the police. They said they would keep an eye out for him. It has been 4 years, and nobody in our neighborhood has experienced anything like this since. Story 41. There was a minister at a grocery store who kept trying to hit me in the chest and stomach. I had to call the store security. Story 42. I was about 14 at my best friend's birthday party. We went to a part of his neighborhood that was basically an empty lot with overgrown grass. My friend and most of his family went back to his house, but I stayed there talking about life with his cousin. Then, from the bushes, we saw a bald, shirtless, overweight man run toward us with an angry expression. We had to climb a chain-link fence and left behind a football. This was in Honduras, so the assumption was that he was from a gang. Story 43. My spouse was in my parents' garage after they had both passed away and we had just started dating. Suddenly, my dad's portable workbench radio began playing his favorite talk show. I told her it was my dad giving her a thumbs up as the son-in-law he never had. Story 44. I was climbing a mountain in Africa by myself when I got kind of lost. The sun set, and then it was completely dark. It started raining with lightning and thunder. I was completely alone, and to this day, only God knows how I found my way back. Story 45. Sitting on my porch as lightning struck the tree 3 feet away. Instantly, the tree exploded, splitting off a limb that hit the porch, and the other half caught fire. Fun afternoon. Bonus. The firefighter helped me remove the limb from the roof. Story 46. The time I nearly got mugged. I fully admit I am an idiot. I went out to dinner with my boss in Shanghai. I was a kindergarten English teacher, and she bought us a bottle of wine, almost 90% of which I drank. The poor choice I made was not to get a taxi back to my flat, but to walk with my headphones in. This was in the day when most headphones were knockoff white-wired Apple earbuds. Cut to me walking on a shady street. I noticed a man in my peripheral vision and got a bad feeling. For context, I am a tiny 5'1" white woman. I paused my music. A couple of minutes later, he was behind me reaching to snatch my handbag. Unfortunately for him, I am also a Taekwondo instructor and third Dan. I pivoted on my heel, struck his nose with my open palm, and ran away into the nearest family mart, where I called my roommates who promptly came and collected me. Moral of the story: get that taxi. Story 47. I was watching television by myself in my family room one night. I heard a strange droning sound, and then it felt like my head was struck by a bolt of electricity. The pain in my head was immense. I could hardly move and tried to scream. It was like my teeth were welded together, and although I could breathe, I could not scream. It was over in about 10 seconds, like I was suddenly released. I fell back in my chair, exhausted, and the pain in my head slowly subsided. I was afraid it was the beginning of a stroke or aneurysm, so I went to the emergency room, but whatever happened was over and there were no signs of why it happened. The neurologist told me it was called a thunderclap headache, but he could not find a cause for it. I guess it is in the category of just one of those things. Story 48. I live in Fort Myers, Florida, which was directly hit by Hurricane Ian. I was without power for around 35 days, and for many months after power was restored, there were no streetlights where I live. After the sun went down, it was very dark. There is a large area of land about the size of a football field behind my house, and I often threw a ball using a chuck-it stick for my dog. Her favorite ball was a glow-in-the-dark variety, so I started taking her out after dark and let her chase the glowing balls. One night, I sensed something flying around me. It was pitch dark, so there was nothing to see, but I could feel its presence. I cut the session short. The same thing happened the next night. Freaked me out and I went inside. A day or two later, I realized that bats were attracted to the sound of the ball flying through the air and were flying around me. It did not really matter that I figured it out. It was still too unsettling for me to throw the ball for her at night until the streetlights were working again. Story 49. On a later Saturday evening, I just came out of the shower and heard the doorbell. Since I was not dressed yet and was not expecting anyone, I did not answer. But the ringing did not stop, and soon, whoever was down there just kept their finger on the doorbell. Annoyed, I answered the speakerphone to at least hear who was there and was greeted with, "Open that door," a young male with another male laughing in the background. I knew they would not be able to come up to my apartment as long as I did not open the door, but I still started shaking. I asked them who they were and what they wanted, and after some back and forth, finally one said, "Come on, are you serious right now? Let us in, Marissa." It could have been a different female name. I cannot remember exactly, but it definitely was not my name or the name of anyone I knew. Growing more anxious, I said, "I know no Marissa. She does not live here. So who are you and what do you want?" Now they started to get annoyed, as if I was lying to them and had just asked them to come over. I kept denying them until one of them said, "Wait, isn't that house number 5? I replied, "No, it's number 3. It turned out they wanted to visit their female friend who lived next door, whose last name sounded very similar to mine. They did not bother to thoroughly check before ringing my doorbell and accusing me of lying. When they realized their mistake, I heard an "oh, sorry," and then they burst out laughing in front of the door as they went to the next house. I did not think it was funny. It was scary having these two men in front of my home, banging on my door, demanding I let them in, and getting increasingly agitated while I was a woman home alone. Took me a while to stop shaking. Story 50. I used to work the swing shift, so I'd get home around midnight and stay up until around 3 or 4. I live alone. Last winter, I was in my living room around 2 a.m. after work, watching TV, when I heard an extremely loud and violent pounding on my back door. It wasn't constant, but happened at random intervals. My backyard is fenced off and very overgrown, so there is absolutely no reason for someone to be back there. I was petrified. After turning off my TV and sitting in terror for what felt like hours, I tried to carefully look through my kitchen and laundry room at my back door, but couldn't see anyone on my back porch. My back porch light is solar charged and turns on and stays on as long as it's dark. I eventually had to slowly creep toward the door and look through the window, but there was no one on my porch or in my backyard. I turned my heater off just in case it was breaking down and making the noise since it's next to my back door. The noise stopped after that, and I haven't had to use my heater much since, so I'm still not sure what the noise was from. I really hope it was the heater. Story 51. I was on a work trip in London that got extended unexpectedly. I had a mix-up with a hotel booking at one of the places I usually stay and had to find an alternative on short notice. It was already 7 p.m., so I found a boutique place nearby that had good reviews on Booking.com. Upon arriving, it became clear that it was very small, with maybe 4 to 6 rooms. There was just a young man at the reception who checked me in. Not the owner, just staff. While doing so, I noticed him paying attention to my engagement ring and generally analyzing me. After he finished checking me in, things got weird fast. He asked me to just stay in reception while he went to check my room. I immediately became alert and asked what he meant by that, with red flags everywhere. He said something like, "I just want to check that everything is okay with your room," or something generic. I kept asking what he meant and insisted on coming with him, saying I was tired. All my alarms were going off at this point. He could be tampering with the lock or doing all kinds of things. I followed him to the room. He opened it, went in, and of course, everything was fine. He gave me the key and left. The vibes were so eerie that I sat down and immediately booked another hotel. About 5 minutes later, I got up, grabbed the key and my bag, and headed to the door to leave. As I opened it, he was still standing on the other side. Thank God I had thought of a story. I immediately said, "Oh my God, I'm so sorry for the confusion, but my colleague who I'm traveling with is waiting for me right outside, and it turns out I have another reservation somewhere else with a group." As I ran past him, I like to think that all of my true crime-induced anxiety really paid off that night. Story 52. Had sleep paralysis after a week of heavy drinking in Napa. First night back, home alone, about 18 years old. Woke up unable to move, heard footsteps, willing myself to move or shout out, couldn't. Closed my eyes and tried to use willpower to move, felt a thud on my chest. Opened my eyes to see a man with a mustache kneeling on my chest, leaning forward, looking me dead in the eye. Primal fear. After what seemed like ages, I looked past him to my hand and willed my finger to move. It responded slightly. My fingers moved. Then a massive rush came over me. I bolted upright. Nobody was there. I searched the house from top to bottom. Nothing. Only later I learned about sleep paralysis and realized it wasn't some evil ghost. Story 53. I heard children playing outside so loudly that I went outside to check if anyone was there, but nobody was there. I went back inside and heard them again, but louder. So I went outside and ran around the house, running the opposite way in case they were playing games with me, but there still weren't any children. Story 54. I felt both my ankles grabbed and pulled down from the bed. Nobody was there. I was 11 years old. I still do not know what happened, but I fell to the floor vertically. Story 55. A silly one. Woke up early the other morning, fed the cats, took my cup of tea back to bed, and caught up with the news. Suddenly, I heard the noise of the bath running. My first thought was that I had an intruder. It gave me quite a start to suddenly hear water running when I live alone. Of course, it was the cats. I still don't know how they did it, as the faucets are high up on the wall to be convenient for the over-the-bath shower. Little rascals. Story 56. Also the funniest in hindsight. I was visiting my grandparents' graveside while I was in town once. It was late October, so it got dark around 4:45 p.m., and it was freezing outside. There's a small seating area across from their mausoleum, and I sat on it to smoke a cigarette with them. They were both smokers. We shot the breeze. The sun was setting, so I said I'd call it a day. When I stood up, the bench I was sitting on tipped because it was on an incline, and I was a larger person. I instinctively put my hand out to save it, neglecting to consider that it was very heavy. I immediately got pinned to the ground. My hand was stuck for over an hour between heavy stone and gravel, and I ended up ripping a nail off, freeing myself. The cemetery was empty. The sun was setting. It was terrifying at the time, but I know my grandparents would have rolled watching me try to escape before helping me out. Story 57. I was staying in my ex's room while he left to buy some things. I definitely heard the gates close, so I'm sure he went out for real. As I sat on his bed, his younger brother peeked inside the room with funny-looking eyes and then suddenly ran away quickly when I looked at him. I laughed it off. When my ex came back, I told him about his funny younger brother, and that's when he told me that his younger brother hadn't been home for 2 days because he was at camp. Story 58. I was in my apartment alone when a random child was in the kitchen making a sandwich. When I asked him, "What are you doing?" He started running to my room. I chased him only to find no one in my room. Story 59. I was doing an overnight security job in an empty office building. All the employees had either left, moved, or been laid off, but they wanted someone there. It was about 2 a.m., and I was just dozing at the front desk when the elevator dinged. The door opened, and nothing was there. I thought, what the hell? Then this person just walked out into the lobby and slowly exited through the door. Story 60. I fell asleep in a taxi in Medellin after staying up all night partying. Luckily, the taxi driver stopped the car and waited for me to wake up before dropping me off at the restaurant. The 4-digit code system that taxis and riders use helped me out a lot. Story 61. When I was a kid, I was playing on the playground during school with my class. I must have been 5 years old in kindergarten. For some reason, I decided to pretend to be stuck to the playground. I thought the teachers would tell me to hurry up and go back to the classroom, but instead, they left me there. Eventually, after everybody had left, I was alone at 5 years old and decided to wander across the school oval. As I was walking, a man pulled me aside. I believe he was the school gardener and asked me if I went to the school. While on the premises, I said no, and he let me keep walking. I ended up on the road out front of the school. As this happened, my mom arrived early to pick me up. She saw me freaked out and took me back to the classroom where they said, "Oh, we noticed she was missing." It's scary because it was the 1990s in Australia, and if my mom hadn't been there, I could have been hit or abducted. If this happened today, it would definitely be newsworthy. Story 62. Not me, but a friend of mine heard some creepy music when trying to fall asleep. I am pretty sure that was quite scary. Story 63. I wanted to clean the bathtub, but all the products were on the top shelf. I took down one jar, then another, and a lid fell on my eye, followed by a large blob of liquid. I washed my eye for an hour under cold water, cried, and waited for the painful sensation to pass. Story 64. Experiencing sleep paralysis for the first time. No shadow people or anything, just eyes wide open, fully awake, body completely paralyzed. Eventually, I was able to start moving my hands and managed to jolt myself up. This happened after taking pregabalin, definitely a connection. Story 65. Yesterday, I was walking home from the gym and had to go through the train station. It was completely empty. Suddenly, an express train passed by with only about half a meter gap from my shoulder, without sounding a whistle. I was very startled. Story 66. Passing out in the shower. I am an average healthy person who is now having these issues and have been wearing this awful Zeo monitor for 2 weeks with 4 days remaining. I think the monitor is making me worse. I'm not sure why turning 22 seems to be caused. I fell out of the bathtub with the shower hookup the day after my birthday. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.